Skoda doesn't make SUVs very often, and they made an attempt. The Yeti was one of the most capable cars that you could buy in its segment. However, a polarizing design meant that it didn't find many takers in the Indian market, the SUV-loving Indian market, and that sort of sent the car to the uninspiring end of the sales charts. But for the second attempt at the SUV genre, Skoda has a new design direction in place that could only push the sales charts upward. Now, a replacement for the Yeti is the new Kodiaq, which appears in 2018. However, leading the charge for Skoda's SUV ambitions is the Kodiaq. It's also the first SUV flagship for the brand. That means that it pips the Superb not only on pricing but also on kit and design sophistication. Now that makes it quite a tempting buy in the premium space. However, that also puts it in the path of the Toyota Fortuner and the Ford Endeavour. Two brutes that have literally stamped all the competition that ever spawned in their territory. Will the Kodiaq meet a similar fate too? Let's find out. The design approach of the three SUVs is quite diverse, and there is something for everyone. For those looking at a classic boxy silhouette and an imposing face, the Ford Endeavour does it right and neatly combines burly retro styling cues with new age equipment. The Toyota Fortuner did the same in its previous generation, but now presents itself as a SUV that is more stylish, lean, and one that mimics the design and the form of the Lexus models from the pricey end of Toyota's portfolio. The Kodiaq is futuristic and premium in its design and looks fit for the modern cityscapes, club visits, and 4-digit valet tips. The sharper lines and the bohemian crystal work inspiration for the LED lighting elements is one of the best that we've seen from the Czech car maker. With its polished stance, it even pales some of its German corporate siblings in appearance. I personally prefer the design of the Endeavour though. It's got the stance of a typical full-size SUV and fits nicely into the urban and natural jungles. The other two seem a bit too sophisticated to get their knees dirty or their skin scratched, and in that sense, they don't feel as rugged as I would like my SUV to be. If dimensions matter to you, the Endeavour is the largest and the Kodiaq gets dwarfed by the brutes when they stand together. The dimensions become even more evident when you step inside the cabins. Getting in and out of the Kodiaq is as easy as a compact crossover, and once inside, you are greeted by the plush materials and the millimeter-perfect fit and finish that is typical to newer Skoda cars. The sheen of the dashboard inlays, the crispness of the displays, and the slick behavior of the digital interfaces is on par with what the iPhone 10 generation would expect. It's even got the best sound system of this test. All controls fall easily at hand and are exactly where you expect them to be. 12-way electrical adjustment for both the front seats lets their occupants fine-tune the lumbar support a little better than their rivals. Visibility is decent, but the Kodiaq's driving position is more car-like in comparison to the other two. Take your pick. Typical to Skoda, there are nifty little features that give it a juicier sales brochure. For example, the umbrellas that are stored in the front doors, the clever door edge protectors that pop out when you open the door, or a removable boot illumination lamp that also doubles up as an LED flashlight. Like its corporate sibling, the Volkswagen Tiguan, there's certainly a better feel-good factor in the Kodiaq's cabin as compared to its rivals. But there is no denying that the Fortuner and the Endeavour are a size larger. That not only gives them a roomier third row, but also puts the cabin size in line with the expectations of this price bracket. The cabins of the Endeavour and the Fortuner need the users to climb into them like a typical SUV. The designs of their interiors, though, feel 2015 in comparison to the Kodiaq's new age appointments. The Endeavour's cabin has a welcoming and airy feel to it, with its bright leather upholstery. The infotainment with its 3-pot layout looks good, but the controls for it, mounted on either ends of the steering wheel, need getting used to. Despite having the largest cabin of the lot, the cooling efficiency of its air conditioning was the best in the test for all 3 rows. We didn't like the sluggish infotainment system on our aging test sample, but it has now been replaced by a slicker Sync 3 system in the 2000 model year Endeavours. If infotainment systems were deal breakers, the Fortuner would have to go home right away. But there is much more to these SUVs than just that, 2 of which are space and comfort. The Fortuner offers ample space and comfortable seating, though it could have done with better headroom. The cabin lacks flair and isn't as feature-rich as its rivals. The Fortuner drops points further as the dark upholstery, high window line and the lack of a sunroof prevent the cabin from feeling as airy as the Endeavour or the Kodiaq. Of the three cars, the Endeavour edges ahead for providing more accommodating seats with better cushioning and contouring, clearer visibility of the road, a roomier feel in the cabin and better space management overall. If you necessarily need a third row of seats, the Endeavour has a relatively more comfortable set on offer, and the seats can be dropped electrically to liberate a boot space that was the best of this test. While the Kodiaq has bagged a 5-star rating at the Euro NCAP tests, the Fortuner and the Endeavour claim 5-star ratings at the Australian NCAP tests. The scoring is closely matched too, with the Ford's imposing face isn't as friendly with the pedestrians as the Kodiaq or the Fortuner.
Well, the Skoda Kodiaq definitely looks good on the inside as well as outside, but then again it gets beaten up by the Fortuner and the Endeavour in terms of space. But how do they stack up against each other when we put them on the road? We'll be right back with the rest of the story after this particular break. Welcome back, you're watching Overdrive. Now, just before we went on this short break, we did tell you how the beautiful Skoda Kodiaq fares against the Toyota Fortuner as well as the Ford Endeavour in terms of space as well as design. Now it's time to check out just how these cars fare against each other in terms of performance.
The on-paper figures of the Kodiaq's power plant make it the least powerful of the class, and that may make you believe that this engine is actually underpowered. However, after driving this car in the city and on the highway, I believe that the power and torque is quite adequate for what the Kodiaq is set out to do. It is in fact quicker to the ton than the Fortuner and the Endeavour despite their larger engines. The power band lies between the 2500 to 4000 RPM mark, and the Kodiaq cruises at 100 km an hour in top gear at a relaxed 1600 RPM. Where it loses out to the other two is the in-gear acceleration under full load. In a nutshell, the Fortuner or the Endeavour offer better drivability, overtaking and load-bearing abilities than the Kodiaq, a classic example of displacement advantage. Surprisingly, however, the Kodiaq doesn't pip its rivals on fuel economy despite being lighter and making taller ARAI claims. The Fortuner was the most fuel efficient in that regard, though it needs a relatively higher engine speed of 1900 RPM to cruise at 100 km an hour. The drivetrain, the transmission, it's hard to find a fault with. It works exceptionally well. The engine isn't as refined as the engine in the Kodiaq or isn't as punchy as the engine in the Endeavour, but it delivers power and torque in a very generous and predictable manner, and it will continue to do so reliably for years to come. It feels quite involving to drive too. The automatic transmission seldom needs you to make a manual selection, and for the more serious off-road enthusiasts, there is an optional manual transmission as well. The four-wheel drive system won't break a sweat even if you were to make an off-season trip to Ladakh, and that go-anywhere capability is what gives the Fortuner its cult following. The Endeavour lets you choose from two engine options, the capable 2.2-litre motor and the class-leading 3.2-litre unit that we have on our test. Now, this engine has excellent power and torque delivery, and there's never really a dearth of power or torque whether you're driving on the road or off it. The 3.2-litre motor delivers the hardest punch of the trio, but the fuel economy takes a hit in the bargain. The engine is surprisingly refined and becomes vocal in its gravelly tone only past the 3000 RPM mark, which is a zone that you won't visit often given the meaty torque that it offers low down. The gearbox works as intended too, be it the city, highway or off-road use. The Endeavour's 30-degree approach and 25-degree departure angles are on par with that of the Fortuner, but the Ford has marginally better ground clearance and water wading capabilities. Last year, we took the Fortuner and the Endeavour to the snowy regions up north to find out which one was the better car of the two when the going got tough. Will the Kodiaq do all of that? I'm not sure yet. That's a story for another day. But in all fairness, the Kodiaq doesn't make any pretensions about being an off-roader. Even the driving modes do not have an off-road mode. So that 4x4 badging that you see all around, it's more of a safety feature out on the slippery roads than something intended for hardcore off-road use. All three cars feel stable at highway speeds. The Fortuner has slightly better ride quality though. Typical to a body-on-frame layout, it works best under a full load and can feel relatively rigid. The Endeavour is on par with the Fortuner's bump absorption, but there is a fair bit of pitch and dive in comparison, giving it second place in the ride and handling department. Kodiaq handles the curves better than the larger SUVs, feels more nimble to drive, but isn't as supple or silent over harsh bumps, ruts or joints. In that sense, it feels more station wagon than SUV. If you're upgrading to the Kodiaq from any other Skoda that's not a Yeti, then you will be surprised to find a fair bit of body roll and a steering setup that is unexpectedly light. But it is all in favor of making this car comfortable and convenient for city and highway use. And that it does pretty well. Summing this up is going to be very simple despite the three cars being so closely matched. Now, the Toyota Fortuner, it continues to garner big numbers, and that is courtesy of an excellent package and Toyota's robust after-sales service. Now that will continue to work in its favor, and it's a vehicle that is still very capable across various terrains. But then its new sophisticated form may not want you to get it dirty very often. And speaking of sophistication, nothing does it like the Skoda Kodiaq. It's sophisticated, and if you would rather have that over brute and muscle, this is the car for you. It's also got impeccable fit and finish, and also happens to be a more economical alternative to the other German crossovers. But the Endeavour, it's got the size, it's got the stance, it's got the firepower, and it has those go-anywhere capabilities that you expect from an SUV in this particular price bracket. And despite that, you could still arrive at a corporate or a page 3 party without your vehicle looking too utilitarian. It also happens to be the best price SUV of this lot. So all these things considered, I think the Endeavour is the best package in this comparison, and that makes it a clear winner of this test.